My beloved child, something about this reading did not frighten them. It rearranged the way they saw your future. They had gone there expecting numbers. Simple answers. A prediction about whether you would struggle, rise, lose, gain, or somehow remain exactly where they had imagined you. But the moment the psychic placed her hands near the cards, her expression changed. Not dramatically. Not enough to create panic. Just enough for your soulmate to notice. And the third party noticed too. There was a pause that felt strangely long, as though the room itself had become aware that the question about your money was never really about money. Then she said something neither of them had prepared to hear. Your financial story cannot be read from your present circumstances. That sentence unsettled them. Because they had been judging you from what was visible now. Your current position. Your current pace. The things you had not yet achieved. The opportunities that seemed delayed. The quiet seasons where nobody could see what you were building inside yourself. But the psychic was looking somewhere else. She was looking at patterns. Choices. Timing. And a future version of you that appeared almost disconnected from the person they thought they understood. Your soulmate leaned forward. The third party became unusually still. And then came the first revelation. She said your path carried something she called a delayed expansion. Not instant luck. Not some magical fortune appearing overnight. Something far more powerful. A period where your confidence, discipline, and decisions would begin working together at the same time. Think about that. What happens when someone who has spent years learning finally enters the season where everything they learned becomes useful? That was what she believed she was seeing. And suddenly, the question in the room changed. It was no longer, how much money will this person have? It became, who will this person become when their opportunity finally meets their preparation? Your soulmate felt that question deeply. Because somewhere inside, they remembered the parts of you other people had ignored. The way you kept going without applause. The way you quietly adjusted when something failed. The way you could disappear into your own thoughts and return with a completely different plan. And here is where the reading became even more unexpected. The psychic said there was a financial decision ahead of you that would look small to outsiders. Almost ordinary. A new skill. A different direction. A conversation. Perhaps an opportunity that would not appear impressive at first. But she believed that one choice would create a chain reaction. One door opening another. One connection leading toward another possibility. One brave decision changing the mathematics of your future. The third party immediately asked, "So are you saying they're going to become rich?" The psychic did not answer quickly. Instead, she looked directly at your soulmate. And what she said next made the entire room silent. Money is not the shocking part of this person's future. Your soulmate blinked. Because what could possibly be more shocking than the very thing they had come to ask about? Stay with this moment. The answer changes the meaning of everything. She explained that the strongest symbol around you was not wealth. It was independence. The kind of independence that comes when a person stops needing approval before making important decisions. The kind that changes relationships. Changes boundaries. changes who gets access to your time, and changes who can still influence your direction. That was when the third party's curiosity became something else. Because suddenly they understood that your future growth might not only change your lifestyle, it might change your entire circle. And your soulmate? They were beginning to realize that the version of you they had been thinking about might already be disappearing. Not because you were becoming someone fake, but because you were becoming more of yourself. Then the psychic reached for one final card. She turned it slowly. Her eyes narrowed. And for the first time since the reading began, she whispered something your soulmate would remember long after leaving that room. This person is going to surprise everyone who misunderstood their quiet season. But she was not finished. Because the next thing she revealed had nothing to do with how much money you could make. It had everything to do with why your soulmate may soon see you very differently. The strange part was this: your soulmate did not leave that room thinking about your bank account. They left thinking about whether they had underestimated the person you were becoming. The psychic had barely finished speaking when the atmosphere shifted again. Your soulmate looked down at the table. The third party looked toward the door. And for a few seconds, neither of them asked another question. Because the reading had moved beyond money. It had started exposing perception. Who believed in you? Who doubted you? Who had quietly measured your future using an outdated version of your life? Then the psychic leaned back and said something even more unsettling. Someone close to this situation keeps expecting this person to remain predictable. Your soulmate immediately understood why that mattered. You had been predictable once. Not weak. Not incapable. Predictable. You tolerated certain things. You gave certain people extra chances. You explained yourself when silence might have served you better. You sometimes delayed your own decisions because you were trying to understand everyone else. But according to the reading, that pattern was changing. And your money was connected to that change. Not through fantasy. Through behavior. Through the moment you begin valuing your time differently. Through the moment you stop giving your best energy to places that return almost nothing. Through the moment you realize that opportunity does not always arrive looking important. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a small responsibility. A new routine. A skill nobody around you understands yet. A conversation you almost cancel. A decision that feels uncomfortable simply because it is new. And then the psychic revealed the second major symbol. A doorway. She described it as an opportunity that appears after a period of frustration. Your soulmate asked, "How soon?" But the psychic refused to attach some dramatic deadline to it. Instead, she said, the timing depends on whether they recognize it. That answer stayed with your soulmate. Because maybe your future was not waiting for luck. Maybe it was waiting for awareness. Pause on that thought. How many turning points look ordinary while they are happening? How many life-changing decisions begin with something as simple as saying yes to learning, leaving, starting, applying, creating, or trying again? The third party seemed uncomfortable with that interpretation. They wanted certainty. They wanted the psychic to describe your future as though it were already fixed. But she kept returning to the same idea. Your potential was expanding because your choices were changing. And then your soulmate asked the question they had apparently been holding back from the beginning. If they become successful, will they still want the same people around them? The psychic did not smile. She did not dramatize the answer. She simply said, "They will want whoever can recognize them without trying to reduce them." That line landed differently. Because now your soulmate was no longer thinking about whether you would have more. They were wondering whether they had shown enough respect for who you already were. And the third party? They suddenly understood why this reading felt so personal. Your growth could expose the difference between people who loved your presence and people who only loved your availability. That distinction changes everything. If this message is connecting with something you have been quietly realizing in your own life, share it with someone who may need the same perspective, leave a comment with the word "forward," and subscribe if you want to stay connected to this unfolding journey. Because the most important part of the reading had not happened yet. The psychic gathered the cards. Then stopped. One card had remained underneath the others. She stared at it longer than expected. Your soulmate noticed her expression and asked what it meant. She answered with a question. Has this person recently become quieter about their plans? Your soulmate froze. Because there were things about you they had noticed. A different energy. Less explaining. More observing. Moments when you seemed mentally somewhere else, as though you were already seeing a future nobody around you could see yet. The psychic tapped the final card. "This is not secrecy," she said. "This is preparation." And suddenly the entire reading made sense in a completely different way. Your money was not the mystery. Your transformation was. The financial shift was only going to make that transformation visible. But then came one final detail. A detail the third party had never expected the psychic to mention. She said someone connected to your soulmate would eventually hear about an opportunity meant for you before you heard about it yourself. And what that person chooses to do with that information could reveal exactly where their loyalty stands. What happened next was not written in the cards at all. It began with a name your soulmate recognized immediately. The psychic had been speaking about an opportunity connected to your future when she suddenly paused. Not because the reading had become unclear. Because something had become specific. She said there appeared to be a person standing near the edge of your financial path. Someone who might hear about a possibility before you did. A recommendation. An introduction. A conversation behind closed doors. Perhaps even a chance connected to work, business, creativity, or a direction you had not seriously considered yet. Your soulmate shifted in their seat. The third party asked, almost too quickly, "Who is it?" The psychic looked at them. Then came a sentence neither of them expected. The important question is not who receives the information. It is whether they pass it forward. That changed the atmosphere instantly. Because suddenly this was no longer a prediction about success. It was a test of character. Imagine someone discovering that a door could open for you before you even know the door exists. Would they tell you? Would they encourage you? Would they quietly ignore it? Would they convince themselves that you were not ready? Or would they hesitate because your growth might change the balance between you? Your soulmate became unusually quiet. Something about the question clearly touched a memory. Maybe there had already been moments when your potential had been discussed without you present. Maybe people had already formed opinions about what you could or could not handle. But the psychic seemed less interested in the past than in what would happen next. She said your coming chapter carried a strange reversal. People who once assumed they would always be ahead of you could eventually find themselves asking how you moved so far without announcing anything. Not because you were competing. That was the fascinating part. You were not racing anybody. You were simply becoming more intentional. More selective. More willing to build quietly before speaking loudly. And that difference was about to become visible. Then your soulmate asked something unexpected. What should they do if this opportunity appears? The psychic answered almost immediately. Do not choose from desperation. Those words seemed simple. But there was weight behind them. Because she believed your biggest financial turning point would not come from grabbing everything available. It would come from recognizing what actually aligned with the life you wanted. There would be offers that looked impressive but drained your energy. Paths that promised speed but demanded too much of your peace. And then there would be one option that might appear slower, quieter, even uncertain at first. Yet it would give you room to grow. Room to think. Room to become difficult to replace. That was where your soulmate began seeing your future differently. They had expected the psychic to describe money as something you would chase. Instead, she described a future where value started chasing you because of what you learned to do exceptionally well. Stay with that idea for another moment. What if the next version of your life is not built by working harder in every direction? What if it comes from becoming clearer? Clearer about what deserves your attention. Clearer about who deserves access to your plans. Clearer about which opportunities are expansion and which are merely distraction. The third party finally asked whether this transformation would change your personality. The psychic shook her head. No. It will reveal it. And that answer hit harder than anything else she had said. Because perhaps you were never meant to become a completely different person. Perhaps the confidence, discipline, vision, and independence were already there. Buried underneath hesitation. Covered by circumstances. Waiting for the right season to become visible. Then came another twist. The psychic said your soulmate would eventually witness something tangible. Not a promise. Not a prediction. Evidence. A message. A result. A decision you make. Something that proves your direction has changed. And when that moment arrives, your soulmate may finally understand why your quieter season was never empty. You were preparing. But there was still one question left on the table. The third party looked directly at the psychic and asked. When everything starts changing for them, what happens to us? For the first time, the psychic did not answer immediately. She looked toward your soulmate. Then toward the final card. And what she said next would turn the entire reading away from money and toward the one relationship neither of them had expected to be tested. The next answer did not predict who would stay, it revealed what would decide it. The psychic looked at the final card for several seconds, then gently turned it toward your soulmate. There was no dramatic warning. No theatrical prediction. Just one quiet idea. Growth changes relationships because it changes what a person is willing to accept. Your soulmate did not move. The third party's expression tightened slightly. Because suddenly, the question was no longer about whether your future success would separate people. It was about whether certain relationships could grow with you. That difference mattered. The psychic explained that when your financial life begins changing, the first transformation may not be visible in what you own. It may be visible in what you refuse. You may stop saying yes merely to keep the peace. You may stop explaining your ambitions to people determined to misunderstand them. You may become slower to reveal your plans. More deliberate with your energy. More protective of your time. And strangely, those small changes could reveal more about the people around you than any amount of money ever could. Because some people celebrate your boundaries. Others experience them as rejection. Some people admire your discipline. Others secretly preferred the version of you who was always available. That was the test the psychic believed was approaching. Not wealth. Alignment. Your soulmate finally asked, "Does that mean they'll walk away from people?" The psychic shook her head. Not necessarily. But they may stop walking backward just to remain familiar. Something about that sentence changed your soulmate's expression. Maybe they remembered every moment when you had made yourself smaller to keep a connection comfortable. Every time you hesitated before speaking about what you truly wanted. Every time you accepted less simply because beginning again seemed exhausting. But the future described in that room did not look like repetition. It looked like movement. And movement has a way of revealing who can walk beside you without needing you to slow down. Then the psychic said something even more surprising. Your biggest financial shift might begin emotionally before it begins materially. First, your thinking changes. Then your habits. Then your standards. Then your decisions. Only after that does the outside world begin reflecting what happened internally. That is why nobody should underestimate the quiet season. It may look like nothing is happening. But underneath the surface, identity is being rebuilt. And once identity changes, decisions become different. Imagine two versions of the same person standing before the same opportunity. One thinks, "What if I fail?" The other asks, "What would I learn if I try?" One waits for permission. The other gathers information and moves carefully. One sees a closed door and assumes the journey is over. The other notices the hallway. That difference can alter years. Your soulmate seemed to understand that. But the third party still wanted something more concrete. So what exactly happens with their money? The psychic smiled slightly. Perhaps because that had been the original question all along. She said the reading suggested accumulation rather than spectacle. Progress that builds. Knowledge becoming more valuable. A decision creating another decision. A useful skill becoming leverage. A connection opening access. Small improvements that eventually stop looking small. There might not be one dramatic morning when everything changes. Instead, there may be a moment months or years later when you look backward and realize you are standing somewhere your earlier self could barely imagine. That was the shocking truth. Your future did not appear powerful because something extraordinary was going to rescue you. It appeared powerful because you were becoming capable of recognizing and using opportunities differently. And there is a huge difference between those two stories. One depends on chance. The other builds momentum. If you know someone rebuilding quietly right now, share this message with them. And if this journey is speaking to something inside you, leave a comment with the word momentum and subscribe so you can continue exploring where this story leads. Because the reading still had one unexpected layer. The psychic looked directly at your soulmate and asked, "What happens if this person becomes everything you once hoped they could become, but no longer needs your approval?" The question landed harder than any prediction. Your soulmate stared at the table. The third party looked away. And suddenly the real tension behind the visit became visible. Perhaps they had not come only because they were curious about your money. Perhaps part of them needed to know where they would stand if your life expanded. Would they still matter? Would you still listen to them? Would the dynamic remain familiar? Or would your confidence force everyone connected to you to meet a more honest version of themselves? The psychic did not answer those questions for them. She said some answers could only be revealed by behavior. Who encourages you when your first attempt is imperfect? Who respects your plans before they produce results? Who does not mock the beginning because they cannot yet see the ending? Who can celebrate your progress without turning it into comparison? Those people, she believed, would naturally remain closer. Then she turned toward your soulmate. And this time, her voice became softer. You may have a choice before they do. Your soulmate looked confused. The psychic continued. You may hear something about their next opportunity first. There it was again. The mysterious connection mentioned earlier. The possibility that someone connected to your soulmate could discover information capable of helping you move forward. But now the reading became more specific. Your soulmate might become the bridge. And the third party knew it. For the first time, the question was no longer what your future would give you. It was whether your soulmate would help open a door when they had the chance. Then the psychic revealed one final detail about that opportunity. It would arrive through someone neither your soulmate nor the third party expected. And when that person finally entered the story, an old assumption about you would collapse almost instantly. Then a detail surfaced that neither of them had connected to you before, and suddenly the entire reading felt less like prediction and more like recognition. The psychic said the person connected to your next opportunity would not enter your life looking powerful. No obvious status. No dramatic introduction. No flashing sign announcing that this person mattered. They might appear ordinary. A conversation that seems casual. A message you almost overlook. Someone mentioning your name in a room you never entered. But that small interaction could become the beginning of something much larger. Your soulmate immediately asked how they would know when it happened. The psychic gave an answer that made them think differently. You will know because the opportunity will match something this person has quietly been preparing for. Quietly. That word returned again. Because the reading kept pointing toward the same hidden pattern. While people around you were looking for visible proof, you may have been developing something they could not measure yet. Patience. knowledge, experience, better judgment. Maybe even a skill you once treated like a small interest but eventually realized could become valuable. The psychic said this was why the opportunity could surprise everyone else while somehow feeling familiar to you. You would not be starting from nothing. You would be stepping into something your earlier struggles had unknowingly prepared you to handle. Your soulmate seemed deeply affected by that. Then the third party asked the question they had been avoiding. What old assumption collapses? The psychic looked toward them. And for a moment, nobody spoke. Then she said, the assumption that this person needs someone else to create their future. The room went quiet. Because maybe that belief had been sitting underneath everything. That you needed someone to rescue you. Guide every decision. Open every door. Approve every dream. Or perhaps that without certain people beside you, you would never move very far. But the reading suggested the opposite. Support could help you. Love could strengthen you. Connections could open possibilities. Yet the foundation of your future was becoming increasingly internal. Your ability to learn. Your willingness to adapt. Your courage to begin again without making failure your identity. Those were becoming the real assets. And once someone develops those qualities, something remarkable happens. A setback stops feeling like an ending. It becomes information. A closed door becomes redirection. A slow season becomes training. Even uncertainty becomes something you can move through instead of something that controls you. That was when your soulmate finally understood why the psychic had refused to give them a simple number. Because how could she summarize your future with one number when the deeper story involved who you were becoming? Then another strange detail emerged. She said there could be two opportunities arriving relatively close together. One would look impressive immediately. The other would look modest. The obvious choice might attract attention. The quieter choice might create freedom. And your greatest challenge would be recognizing the difference. Think carefully about that. Not everything shiny is expansion. Not everything slow is failure. Sometimes the path that gives you fewer immediate rewards gives you greater control later. The psychic believed your future would require you to choose based on direction rather than appearance. Your soulmate asked, which one will they choose? She smiled. That depends on whether they have learned to trust themselves. There it was. Another unanswered question. Because this entire reading about your money had somehow become a reading about self-trust. And maybe that was the real wealth beginning to form. The ability to hear opinions without surrendering your direction. To receive advice without becoming dependent on approval. To change course without believing you wasted the journey. To build something slowly without feeling embarrassed because someone else moved faster. The third party suddenly seemed less interested in your future fortune. Now they wanted to know what this transformation would mean for them personally. But your soulmate interrupted. They asked something more vulnerable. If they become independent, does that mean they won't need anyone? The psychic answered gently. Independence does not remove love. It removes dependence disguised as love. That sentence stayed in the room. Your soulmate looked almost relieved. Because perhaps your growth did not mean losing connection. It meant choosing connection differently. Not because you were afraid to be alone. Not because somebody controlled the doorway to your future. But because you genuinely wanted certain people beside you. And that kind of choice carries more meaning. Then the psychic gathered the cards one more time. She seemed ready to end the reading. Until your soulmate noticed a symbol drawn near the corner of the final card. They asked what it represented. The psychic stared at it. Her expression changed again. Because apparently, the opportunity they had been discussing was connected to something from your past. Something you once started. Something you may have abandoned. Something you might believe no longer matters. And according to her, that forgotten piece of your past could become unexpectedly important when the next door opens.